explain my role at The Guardian first, before any of you think I'm a journalist, which I'm not. I joined The Guardian in September of last year. Before then I'd been working at Virgin Media in kind of public policy work. So joined The Guardian as head of public policy at The Guardian, working with Helen, who'd been at The Guardian already for quite a while. So I joined just after the first Snowden stories had broken in June. And by September we were kind of moving on to talk about other issues that arose as a result of the Snowden documents, but we were also facing criticism of The Guardian in terms of how we'd done the reporting and whether we'd been responsible in kind of reporting in the way that we had. I don't intend to go through all of the kind of revelations of the Snowden documents, all the stories that we revealed, but some of the relevant ones were obviously the PRISM story on the 6th of June, where we revealed the NSA had been collecting the contents of foreign targets' emails, texts, video chats, photographs from companies like Google, Apple and others. Later in June, we had the G20 story where we found out that GCHQ had been intercepting foreign politicians' communications at the G20, which for me just undermined the myth that G20 summits are done by skill and political nous, and actually they're done by reading people's emails, which is a bit of a destruction of faith. In September, we published a story about encryption, about the fact that the NSA and GCHQ had been unlocking encryption online and potentially endangering the kind of structure of the internet. On Christmas Day, I'm sure you're all on the Guardian website and saw the NSA and GCHQ. So the NSA had been targeting charities, NGOs, the German leadership, the Israeli PM and the EU chief. And then the most recent and latest story that we put out was Optic Nerve, which was probably one of the most widely reported stories, which was about the collection of Yahoo webcam images, which I think made quite a lot of people nervous. So there are certain themes though that emerge from our reporting, which I think will need to be addressed over the kind of coming months and years. First is that the agencies now see threats everywhere, and Ripper has kind of enabled them to kind of roam quite freely across a really broad landscape. I mean, the Ripper, the basis of action there is national security for the purpose of detecting crime, for preventing disorder, for public safety, for protecting public health, or in the interests of economic well-being of the United Kingdom. I'm sure we've each inflicted one of those damages on the country today at least. So we could all be subject to kind of the use of Ripper powers. The second thing that we kind of reveal through our stories is that the agencies are, you might argue, they're operating outside of parliamentary democracy. So, The Guardian believes in the need for secrets and the need for the intelligence agencies to have that kind of ring of secrecy. And the truth is that actually that public policy question about how you do politics around what should be a secret activity is incredibly difficult. But I think when you see joint committees for things like the Draft Data Communications Bill who were completely unaware of the capabilities of the agencies, that should be of serious concern. And when you see the Interception Commissioner going to Parliament and saying that when asked what he did to the agencies to question them about these issues, he went and had a cup of tea with the head of one of the agencies and thought everything was fine, that's a bit of a worry too. The third issue, which I found before this job when I was also worked for an ISP, was that there's quite a lack of technical knowledge inside Parliament, and that's potentially quite dangerous, I think, as we go forward. As digital technology kind of gets built into everything we do as a society, if MPs don't really understand the power of digital technology, what it does and the consequences of misuse of it, feels to me it's quite problematic. The fourth thing I think is the extraterritorial nature of tech companies. Whenever you spoke to MPs about these issues, one of the biggest things that you felt from them was a sense of powerlessness, that there were these companies that hold all our data, these private companies that hold all our data, are not captured by UK law in the way that telecoms companies that are located in the UK used to be. And there was a sense that what GCHQ did in terms of tapping into certain of the fibres of these companies was a response to that kind of extraterritorial nature of these companies. And then there's a second point on the fact that these are kind of US companies, which kind of talks to the difference between the debate in the US and the UK. In the US, I think what you've seen is tech companies are buying into the ideology and the kind of public concern about Snowden and about First Amendment stuff, and a general sense that actually they need to fight to build their reputation as US companies. It feels in the UK it's much more risk management in terms of not really speaking out unless they absolutely need to, and actually holding their own, holding their silence, if you like, unless they're in a real crisis. See Yahoo during the webcam images story. So if you then move to what the lie of the land is now, the debate in the US and the UK has been very, very different. Second thing I would say is this issue remains a minority one. See the room. It remains a minority sport in terms of responding to Snowden. The polling that's been done to date is, it's been it hasn't been fully publicised in terms of the issues to be explored. But one of the big things that comes out of it is that 38 in January there was a poll which found that 38% of people had not heard of the US NSA Snowden revelations before the poll. 42% in the UK. 42% had not heard of GCHQ metadata before that poll. So you see, there's a lot of public, it's a lack of understanding, and this kind of plays to another issue which the Guardian's always been very strong on, which is the idea of kind of media plurality and a free press. And the truth is, if you don't have a story, whether you're an NGO, whether you're the Guardian trying to push your story out to wider society, if you don't have your story on the BBC, then you are in trouble. BBC One is the main source of news for 57% of people. It has 6 of the channels in the top, so multi-platform across TV, across radio, across website. It has 6 of the top 20 cross-platform mentions of news that people use. So when the BBC don't cover your story, which we would argue is a significant public interest story, then the awareness of it amongst wider society is not great. Now, the BBC would probably have their own reasons for why they didn't cover the story more fully. I would only mention that charter renewal is coming up in 2015, and one might not want to take on the government in this period of the cycle. So we have kind of a debate in the UK. It's not the debate that we see in the US. And where are we now? Well, we have Nick Clegg. The Lib Dems have been very good on this issue, especially Julian Huppert. He's been very good. And I think Nick Clegg instinctively agrees with much of the reporting and much of the concern that we've expressed. He announced a couple of months ago, he announced the launch of an Obama-style review, which I would have preferred a Clegg-style review, which would have been one led by him. But he's going to do an Obama-style review, which will be conducted through Fairsay, which will look at some of these issues in more detail. Yvette Cooper came out and did a speech with Demos a few weeks ago, where she outlined a number of issues. The worry for me there is that her speech was so broad as to be quite long grass in which to actually have a sensible debate about oversight of intelligence services and what we do about these issues. And then Cameron obviously has made his views clear that this is all la-di-da nonsense. I would just read to you it's amazing how politicians change over just a few years. In 2009, the Conservative Party released a document called Reversing the Surveillance State, in which the choice quote was, "We believe that your personal information belongs to you, not the state. Where private details are collected by government, they are held on trust. The government must be held accountable to its citizens not the other way around. That seems to have been lost, I think, in the Conservative Party and the government's response to the Snowden revelations. So then finally, kind of what's next for the coverage and what's next for the campaign and what's next for the Guardian on these issues? Well, I think, as I pointed out, the polling at the moment is quite superficial. I think it's been reliant on people already having a good understanding of the issues before they've come to the polling. It's been kind of push polling rather than kind of exploring some of the issues. There was a YouGov poll where it was found that only 19% of people thought that MI5 had too many powers, whereas actually this issue isn't about MI5, so it was kind of completely incorrect anyway. It didn't speak about GCHQ at all or about any of the issues that are raised through the reporting. But even then, 46% of people thought the UK should not store metadata, though this wasn't reported. So I think there's a lot of room for more in-depth qualitative sessions where these issues are explored, and then we'll be looking at some quant sessions on top of that to try and see whether we can elicit a kind of broader reaction from the wider UK public. Obviously, we've got the elections in 2015, and I think it would be, I think Michael speaks to this point, but I think it would be great to see at least two of the three political parties kind of having a view, taking a view on whether RIPA is appropriate and whether the current oversight of the agencies that we've got is appropriate. And then this year we've got the 25th anniversary of the birth of the World Wide Web. So I think it is 25, isn't it? Yeah, yep. Very good, very good. So obviously Tim Berners-Lee is got some strong views on this, which is expressed about especially the encryption stories. I think we'll be looking throughout the year at his Web We Want campaign to try and engage a younger audience in thinking about are they bothered about a world in which all of the data they're putting out there on social networks is freely available to government agencies, and what should we do about it? And then finally, we'll be marking the anniversary of the first PRISM story at the start of June. And we'll be kind of reaching out to the NGO community to think about whether we try and find answers to the questions that we've raised during the last year's coverage, or whether we simply mark it by trying to explain more fully why this kind of matters to wider society. So on that point, I'll hand over to Mike.
Room suddenly got busy just as I'm about to talk, just pointing out. So I was going to be a clever dick and basically look at people's Twitter feeds and try and get some personal data about you. I thought, well, I don't know who's going to turn up to the room, so the person might not be in the room and it would be totally pointless. So I basically looked at my own Twitter feed and I thought, well, what information I've given away? And I looked at the photos I'd uploaded, and I think I'm quite security conscious and quite kind of across these issues, and I'd given away the phone that I use. The metadata is in one of the photos that I've uploaded. And then friends had tweeted when we got drunk at my house recently, and they'd tweeted location data, identifying me in my flat. So then my address is suddenly online, so you can find out where I live. So you can hack my phone, you can find out where I live. What else was there? Like my email, I mean, there was enough data there, basically. Oh, and there was something I'd complained to Barclays about, something, kind of obnoxious tweet late at night. So you could find out who I banked with, my home address, the phone I use. I mean, so when we talk about, I think we're at a point where the public are getting to understand this notion of metadata and what it means. Okay, so it's on the public, but we haven't quite got to the stage where people can really relate and see what the Snowden revelations mean for them and their families personally. And that's the biggest challenge of this campaign. So making this concrete and understanding who the victims are is, I think, our biggest challenge. So in this, I'm going to sort of speak for 5 minutes. What I'd like is we've got a room full of campaigners. I'm going to basically outline all of the problems that we're having with the campaign. And I'd be really interested to hear what you think are some of the solutions to some of those barriers. So the Don't Spy on Us campaign is a coalition of 6 NGOs. It's Article 19, Big Brother Watch, English Pen, Liberty, Open Rights Group and Privacy International, few, I can remember everybody. And then there's a load of other NGOs as well that are associated with the campaign, who are affiliates. And the campaign was brought together because The Guardian were breaking all these revelations. And the attitude of the British government was just pure hostility. So when The Guardian started to publish, Nick Clegg goes on the record and says The Guardian are acting. The Guardian, he said, I've got concerns The Guardian shouldn't publish. David Cameron goes on the record. All 3 party leaders go on the record and say they should not publish. Jeremy Hayward, most important civil servant you've never heard of, goes in to the Guardian offices and says, do you know what, you really shouldn't publish. A D notice gets issued to the Guardian from an air marshal, former wing commander, and it goes to the BBC, and it's not binding, but the BBC does not report Snowden, doesn't touch the story with a barge pole, and there's been a chill on the media. There's been a chill on civil society groups, and we weren't organised and we weren't structured enough. So we've come to, this is the reason why we're doing the coalition, this is the reason why we've got together in order to build a strategy so that we can advocate successfully. I thought what was really interesting what Stella was saying in the earlier session about the issues that MPs are having in engaging with campaigns. And one of the issues is A, information overload, and B, NGOs duplicating similar things. So, and part of it is because we all go and tell our donors, yeah, we're going to deliver this amazing high impact campaign and we're going to get legislation and it's going to be, we're going to have, we are going to be the charity that delivers Cancer Act, 2014. And because we're all going away and saying to our donors, yeah, we're going to have these really high impact campaigns, we're going to deliver legislation, we end up there's this endless duplication. So that's the strength of the coalition. We can all get behind one thing. We've all got behind one advocacy strategy. So these are the assumptions that we've made for our advocacy strategy. One, the first assumption is that the public at large are not as engaged in this issue as would be desirable on an issue which really engages both human rights and fundamental liberties. So we've got to basically expand this issue beyond, Guardian, third largest readership in the world as an online newspaper, but those stats point to a problem. If 45% of the public haven't heard of the Snowden revelations, then we've got more work to do. So the first assumption is we need to outreach. So from that, where are the media outlets that we need to target? If we know the BBC isn't particularly perceptive, what's the online audience? How do we get out to people that may not be engaged with it? What social networks are we using? But also what platforms are we using? Which newspapers do we need to target? So that's the first barrier that we've got to overcome. The second thing is implacable political class hostility. So the reaction has been one, far more muted than it was in the US. So Obama moved pretty quickly. They had this independent inquiry. Secondly, there was an interesting coalition. Legislation, a private member's bill was put forward in Congress and narrowly got defeated by 14 votes. Why? Because Bob Barr libertarians, said, do you know what? It's against the Fourth Amendment. We don't want government snooping on our private communications. And on the other hand, Democrats, civil liberty Democrats representing liberal America, when, yeah, we don't really want the state snooping in on, minority rights activists or using this against people with radical views. So there was this really interesting coalition which was based around the Constitution, and Snowden himself talks about the importance of the Fourth Amendment. This is, he's a real kind of US constitutionalist. That coalition led to very, very close legislation. So it meant that Obama needed to act if he wanted to keep Congress with him. It's one of the few bipartisan pieces of legislation that have had any chance of success in this current Congress. We don't have that in the UK. We don't have those we don't have any sort of sense that there is that broad majority that's willing to come together. But we do have some inklings and we do have some political insight. But we're further down the track than they are in the US. So that's a major thing for us to overcome. And also, we've got a problem which is the very, very first thing that we need, which is an independent inquiry. At the moment, we're not going to get. So the ISC is having an inquiry. We can't have any faith in the ISC. It's appointed by the Prime Minister. It has 7 of the 9 ISC members are former ministers or top flight civil servants. Services Community, Committee. So this is the body that's supposed to hold the intelligence services to account. But it's stuffed with people, ministers, who formerly had access to top secret files and were involved in the funding of those intelligence agencies and may have and may have known about these sort of programs, or at least known about them in the abstract. So the ISC isn't going to deliver what we want. The RUSI process probably isn't going to deliver what we want, because RUSI is an organisation which is stuffed full of former spooks and people with very close connections to, in Eisenhower's famous phrase, the military-industrial complex.
Just a quick question, have you spoken to them?
Yeah, we've sent them and we said, we're here. If you want, if you want any ideas on which society groups to engage with, come to us and we can. No, they've said that this is an ongoing process, and of course we'll, haven't heard since. But RUSI may write the best report. It may write a really fantastic report, but it's not. It's not the independent inquiry that we need. It's not the independent inquiry that's going to flush out the information we need. And secondly, because it's not security cleared, so its staff and specialists won't be security cleared, they can't go and to GCHQ and say, what legislation are you using to hoover up? What legislation are you using that gives you the legal justification for the Tempora programme, which is kind of like the biggest TiVo box you can ever imagine, 3 days buffer of everything, right? The internet on rewind. So we're not going to get that. So those are the kind of campaign assumptions. The way that we see that we break through this impasse is we get manifesto commitments in the run-up to the next general election. As campaigners, election time, great. Gagging law or no gagging law, this is our opportunity in the run-up to the next general election to really influence those policy processes. It's a great time for advocacy, and we will be attempting to make this a very high-profile and prominent election issue. So in order to get those manifesto commitments, we're doing advocacy in Parliament, we're meeting the people writing the policy manifestos, we're trying to turn up the volume in terms of public outrage, and we're bringing together the base, which is all these organisations. The bit in the middle is to do with political insight, political intelligence, working out who are the MPs that are going to join us, who are the MPs that are going to start putting their heads above the parapet. And we've got around 35 MPs that we think are kind of at the core, and who represent interest groups that we would perhaps feel, if you were to write what 35 MPs would you go and speak to, the 35 we've got aren't necessarily the people you'd go to. So, for example, one of the people that signed Caroline Lucas's EDM after David Miranda was detained at Heathrow Airport for 9 hours was Ian Lavery. He's a North East MP, former leader of the NUM, National Union of Mine Workers. He's not someone that I would go and target. But the reason that he's worried about state surveillance is because he was involved in the miners' strike. And he's seen firsthand what overbearing state surveillance does and its impact on ordinary people. And so I think we're trying to bring together, we're trying to think outside the box, and we need ways of flushing people out. So Stella was kind of slightly disparaging about EDMs. Sometimes I think they're quite good because they can pinpoint people that you might not necessarily go to and give you an indication of who's kind of interested in this issue. So there's a range of parliamentary activity that's going to go through to the next general election. And finally, a really key part, I actually wrote a presentation. I don't know why I've ad-libbed. It's probably less effective. But anyway, the final bit of what we're going to do between now and then is we've got membership organisations that are part of the campaign. And so we've talked about why traditional... Not interested. Part of the problem. Yeah, that was like, this is the problem. So what we talked about, like the problem.
That was planned.
Talked about clicktivism and bombarding MPs with emails and how that's like. It's law of diminishing returns. It's just less and less effective. And then we kind of think, well, what do we do instead? All right, well, let's bombard them with tweets. No, that's not working. What do we, Facebook? Why don't we just, spam their wall? And it's kind of that law of diminishing returns for campaign impact. But we've got membership organisations, so who have lots of people who pay money to be part of an organisation because they care about the issue. So by having those at the backbone of our campaign, we're in a position where we can organise events across the UK. So we can organise events in South Wales. We're going to have an event in Newcastle. We're going to have an event in Manchester. And at all those events, we can bring along 4 or 5 MPs, and we can have a room full of 100 people in the upstairs of a pub, like campaigning was 40 years ago. And we can use all those old techniques that we used to do so successfully and apply them in order that people can see this is an issue that ordinary members of the public are engaged and interested in and willing to spend a Friday evening discussing. So that's another core plank of our strategy. So that's what we're kind of... So that's the kind of broad outline. Oh, and there's one last really important thing, which is that one thing that has been really useful in terms of digital campaigning is we have decided to take the UK government to court because mass data retention is a fundamental breach of Article 8 of the Human Rights Act and possibly a breach of Article 10 of the European Convention of Human Rights. So there's an ongoing challenge at Strasbourg, which has been fast-tracked by the judges. And with a previous ECJ ruling that came out last week, we have a really good chance of having these programmes, including Tempora, ruled illegal. And if they are ruled illegal, the UK government will have to bring forward legislation, which is our hook. So in the next Parliament, it's likely that we will have a bill placed in front of us in response to our successful legal challenge. The bit that's the sort of e-activist bit is that we couldn't have afforded to do it if it wasn't for the fact that we were able to launch a website and say to people, this is something we care about, can you help fund lawyers? Now, funding lawyers is not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to get donors to fund. But members of the general public put 20, 30, 40 quid into a pot, and we got £25,000 in 24 hours, 40% of which came from Germany. I mean, that is just... It would be unimaginable to do that 10 years ago. And it was social media that spread the word. And we've got the money now to continue this court challenge. So things like that are where you can have real impact from online campaigning. And I think that's been really successful. So hopefully we get the legal challenge, we get legislation, we've got those manifesto commitments where the parties say we commit to doing something about it. That comes together and we get the legislative reform that will stop these programmes. Thank you.
Just to make a point on social media, so I think my sense has always been, in terms of the kind of Twitter sphere's view of the Snowden stuff, it's very supportive of where the Guardian's been. It's very kind of positive in terms of our reporting. I think it's easy to underestimate how positive it is when we have our engaged online audience who are responding to MPs who are being I'm reluctant to use the word mendacious, but I'm going to use it anyway, in terms of saying that we've endangered national security and all that stuff. So I think while social media hasn't necessarily led to politicians kind of changing the law as yet, it has been incredibly good in kind of maintaining morale within the Guardian, that actually this is something that people do care about, and actually this is an issue that matters. The question is, how do we move that kind of sentiment from Twitter through to, you know, other social media platforms and kind of the population more broadly, and I think that's a real challenge.